Francisco had been engaging in all sorts of high-octane adrenaline-pumping activities and bicycle rides as of recent, so much so that I felt I needed the opportunity to simply not focus on filling his arbitrary experience points bars while running from the police. I had seen some NPCs on jet skis, and although I couldn't find the basic model that seemed to be prominently used on the beach for sale, I decided to take advantage of Francisco's marina-adjacent property as well as his financial boon to buy an entire boat. I had set off slightly before morning. After loading my motorcycle on in a somewhat non-traditional way, I set off into the endless ocean. The choppiness of the water would lead to the ejection of the motorcycle, which was unfortunate but would make room for the player whose helicopter had crashed nearby. After I pulled him on board, he stood on the bow and pointed northwest. When I asked him if there was a reason, it quickly became apparent that there was not. He would then, of course, fall out, motorcycle style, without being safely seated, and before I could make the recommendation he chooses to on his own. I returned to my coastal cruise, not really feeling the obligation to follow the whimsical directions of a person who had fallen out of the sky and whose friend was firing rockets across the bow of my new craft. I find a natural conflict between telling players what to do in a world that is supposed to allow a complete freedom of choice, but I had to accept that this was Francisco's boat and he was in fact the captain. I took the unfortunate pilot to a nearby pier, where he jumped out and went off on his own, and from the chats I can assume he was blown up shortly thereafter. I came across a small island on the west side of the world. Francisco was overly enthusiastic and made sure to dive into a very shallow coastal area. In fact, when he was first trying to board the ship, I had accidentally flung him into the water, and after having changed my flight controls, I seemed incapable of swimming him back to the surface. I would engage in swimming training, which led to several, I'm assuming, horrible, terrible deaths. As hard as I was trying, pressing forward and pitching up and holding shift, as if Francisco's body was an underwater aircraft, to no avail. I eventually realized I was trying too hard, and that simply pressing left shift would direct and move Francisco back to the surface. Trying too hard, a common theme in too many facets of both our lives. This learned skill was of course useful. I climbed up the hill to what appeared to be a makeshift shack on the island. There was a shirtless man here too, who stared at me blankly. I typically assume when I barge into social situations, such a blank stare is unwelcoming, but I decided to forego that extremely self-conscious assumption, and I tried to pretend his expression didn't bother me as I explored the island a little bit. The premise of a place removed from society proper becoming visualized. With that said, the island's shelter was not completely detached from society. It was equipped with satellite TV, a white picket fence, a water tower, and a traffic cone. After exploring its surface, another man appeared, sitting on another milk crate. I tried to find a way to communicate with them, to give any semblance of interaction, starting with the traditional 2 thumbs up and moving regretfully to the DJ expression. The island's natives were unresponsive even to the photography gesture, and before long I realized this island was incredibly boring. It actually portrayed what I believe most people perceive as GTA pacifism, to simply sit passively and do nothing in a place no one knew about or would ever seek. Francisco unfortunately did not have time to do nothing, as his untied boat was quickly floating away. As I swam to it, I acknowledged that a world of sitting around on an island and somehow getting pizza delivered to it would always be an option, and fortunately there was no reason just to swear off civilization, especially when these gentlemen couldn't part with it entirely themselves. I wasn't sure if I was increasing my driving stats. As much as I wanted to relax, I couldn't help but feel like I was falling behind in some way or another. Regarding relaxation, I've always found it hard to tell how much is enough and how much is too much. I don't know if the island's inhabitants were happy, had long-term plans regarding their shack, and I wasn't here to judge, but I did feel refreshed, and the boredom I had experienced from being on an island with people doing absolutely nothing would be a useful reference point whenever I wondered what it would be like to abandon society proper. When I returned home, I found a slip I hoped my property purchase had covered. After a somewhat unique boat parking job, Francisco stomped up the steps and encountered some of his neighbors in the building. I went to thumbs up the man in the corner, but I accidentally engaged in the photography emote. Fumbling through the menus, I finally saluted the old man, and soon after discovered we were allowed to have parties out in the common area. If anything, this novel purchase was not something I would normally do, and it didn't resonate with my or Francisco's behavior. With my constant desire to be constructive and to grow, lest fall behind into a pit of unsuccess or ungrowth, my leisure had rejuvenated my experience after all. I wouldn't be able to afford a new boat every day, but I would certainly be able to appreciate the experiences indefinitely as I continued on this journey.